Jules. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I am doing fantastic. Did you have a good weekend?
I did. You know, I have to say this is going to be posted after the Super Bowl, but over the weekend, it was a big football Sunday. So I don't know if you know this, Brad, but I'm a 49ers fan. I know you're
Yeah.
Vikings. I know it's a sore subject, but we had a big win yesterday. So I'm had a good weekend.
Yeah. Hey, I hate to break it to you, but California is the only state that was rooting for the 49ers, I think, this weekend. So just, I mean,
it was
the
fun.
Lions are in a division. I wanted to see them win just because they've
I know a
never
lot of
gotten
people
really
did.
any love. And so,
Yeah.
but how's that dry January thing working out for you?
You know what? We are
Coming to an end.
almost there. We are almost there. Yeah, no, I'm almost like just sick and tired of me talking about it. It's like every week I'm like, still going. But no, this time for real, almost done. It's Monday. We finish on Thursday. I can't wait to have a hashtag wall banger. And then we have a fun episode today because we have a guest on, and I was actually sent, I believe it was a couple days ago, sent some bottles that I haven't been able to try yet, but I'm so excited to try once my dry January is over, to try their spirit, which we'll talk about, because we're also highlighting a new recipe martini that I've never tried before, Brad.
Turf Club Martini. So I spotted this, was looking for something that leaned a little juniper forward, and so I came across the Turf Club Martini, which, we'll give you the recipe here on the website, but it's just simply 2 ounces of gin. In this case, I used DuNord gin, and 3/4 ounce dry vermouth, a 1/4 ounce of maraschino liqueur, 2 dashes of absinthe, 2 dashes of orange bitters, and a lemon garnish are served up in a nice martini glass. Let me tell you.
Yeah.
It's late afternoon and I'm enjoying it right now. So
yeah, I bet you are.
No,
I bet you
sorry,
are.
you're not.
Yeah. I know that. So the wall banger and the Turf Club Martini are on the menu this weekend for sure. When I saw absinthe in the recipe, I was like, and gin and maraschino liqueur. Yeah, that sounds fantastic.
Winner.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. So we talked about we have a guest with us today, and we'll meet Chris here in just a second. But let me tee that up. So,
I'm ready.
Interestingly enough,
spiel.
And I know, you being a millennial. Are you a millennial? What are you?
Well, you know what?
Where are you?
I'm a zillennial. I'm on
You're
the cusp of Gen Z and millennial.
Yeah.
So
you barely use Facebook is what you're saying.
Correct. Yeah, no, if at all.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So I'm of the generation that does. And so I've cataloged my life there, and which is great because memories pop up. And interestingly enough, 6 years ago, last week, we did a distillery tour here with a group of friends, and we kind of bebopped around the Twin Cities. And one of the first places that we stopped was DuNord, which Chris Montana, our guest, is co-founder of. And I remember that we did this distillery tour, and distilleries were a pretty new thing here in the Twin Cities. Yeah. So it was really a lot of fun. But I remember going through that tour going, these different distilleries that we went to, I thought, God, this would be cool to do something like this. So then DuNord reaches out, I think it was last week or maybe it was the week before, and said, hey, we'd like to send you some stuff. And you and I made a commitment when we started this podcast. And for those of you who are maybe listening for the first time, and for those of you who have heard us say it before, we don't want to talk about anything that actually we don't like, right? Right. And so when they sent us out this care package, which I was like, well, this is exciting because I actually do like their spirits.
Yeah.
I'm like, well, let's get on a podcast and let's talk to them, right? And so last week, 11th hour, I think it might have been Thursday or Friday, I reached out to DuNord and I said, can we possibly talk to the founders and try to set something up? And literally crammed this interview in. And Chris was gracious enough to join us. So when we get to the next segment, we are going to meet Chris. We're going to hear about DuNord, how he got started. Why would we want to, imbibe in his spirits, and and kind of everything else in between. Okay, so Chris, welcome to the show. Hey, introduce yourself. Tell us about you.
Hey, well, first of all, thanks for having me. Right, it's great to be with you. As you said, I'm Chris. That's probably the most important bit. Secondary to that, I'm a husband. I'm a dad of 3 crazy little children who are doing their best to burn my house down every day. and also run DuNord Social Spirits in Minneapolis.
How did you get started? Because you didn't start out wanting to run a distillery, right? Like you actually I think you are an attorney by
yeah, don't
education and
don't hold it against me. Yeah, it's a non-linear path, and I think the more distillers you talk to, the more you find that there just are very few linear paths to owning a distillery. A lot of us came from something else, and for me, I was a political hack for a while, working on campaigns, worked in Congress for a little bit. Went to law school, thought I was going to be a lawyer for a long time. Got to be a lawyer, realized that wasn't going to be that much fun. I wasn't going to have any time for my kids, and so then I just kind of doubled down on the nerd side of me, and that side of me likes the science of brewing and distilling. And so I think I somewhat naively thought, well, how hard could it possibly be, right? I've got a $60,000 loan. Surely that's enough to start a distillery. It's not, by the way.
Okay, yeah.
Please
I was like,
don't
wow,
try that.
That's great.
Oh, no. I mean, I have more gray hair than I should for my age. And it's not just the kids, but yeah. So that's what really got me excited about distilling, which I was already illegally doing in my garage anyway. But I just love the science of it, and I love tinkering around. I love making stuff.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So I've got to ask, you said illegally doing it. So what, so you put together a still and said, hey, which I think actually in your defense, right? I think anybody who has started a distillery has to have some type of understanding of the basic principles of distilling. And I don't know how else you get that unless you go to like distillers school, but like, I mean, how did you go? Did you start with brewing beer and you're like, you know what, I wonder how I extract the alcohol from this beer? Or how did that start in your
so I
garage?
brewed beer for a long time, like
okay,
over a decade, probably more like 15 years, something like that. Fastidious home brewer. I brewed the same beers over and over and over again, changing one variable and then keeping log books and all. I was that guy. It was not very interesting, but some of them I really liked. And yeah, as you say, if you want to, take beer to where it wants to be when it grows up is like a whiskey. The only way to do that is the only legal way to do it is to do it in a licensed distillery. But if you want to open a licensed distillery, you don't really have a way to practice, right? Because it's illegal up until you have it. And so I found that there's generally two origin stories. There's either someone who had a bunch of dough and they thought, this is a sexy industry I want in, and I'll just hire someone who knows what they're doing. Or you've got some DIYer who has a passion for it and they have no dough. And they're like, yeah, but I'm going to figure this out, right? And in that second category, that's where I find myself. And most of those guys and women just said, screw it, I'm going to do it illegally. And, you can buy a still, you can make still. Our first still was a 16-gallon beer keg, right?
Yeah.
With some holes cut out of it and some stuff welded on, and still have it.
That's awesome.
I don't use it anymore. We've gotten better, but
you've upgraded.
Yeah, doesn't take much.
But I mean, I get that too. How do you master what your product is going to be for you to produce it and provide that for people to experience before you even know what you're doing? I mean, you have to practice what that recipe is going to be first, right? So I could see that being a little tricky. For sure.
Yeah, you'd like to, but the industry doesn't really give you any runway. Just keeping in mind that the laws around distilling were not made for us. They were made for what distilling used to look like, which is a few companies that have all the money, and none of this stuff is relevant to them. Now that we have this, thousands of micro distilleries out there, a lot of the laws and regulations have had to kind of catch up, and they're still trying to catch up to us. But the part that has to do with how we start distilleries, the regulations still aren't there. We basically are where we were 20 years ago.
Wow.
So you kind of pulled a Steve Jobs, starting in your garage and now creating this big, empire, if you will, at DuNord, right?
Well, I don't know that I'd go all the way. Perhaps the front end of Steve Jobs' career. I don't know that we've really validated out the back end yet, but I like where your head is. So maybe one day, yes.
No, and Chris, I think you're being kind because based on my research, you started this company, you started distilling, you have multiple spirits, vodka, gin, coffee liqueur, which we'll get into, but then you started a foundation. So what started very small has kind of blown up into this, big, wonderful company. So don't sell yourself short. What you're doing is pretty amazing. And I really want to get to the foundation part, but I'd love to know, you started in your garage, and then how did you get from point A to point B? And then once you were at point B, okay, we're distilling, which spirit did you start with first? And then why and how did you branch out into all the different categories that you're in now?
Yeah. So the very beginning was just trying to make any alcohol at all, right? And,
Right.
the yeast make the alcohol, we just clean it up. So trying to come up with some. So if you want to picture because I made a lot of really funky stuff, I was trying to figure out a way that I could use. I mean, I tried everything. I used cream of wheat at one point because I thought, hey, Northfield is right here. We got this big factory. Maybe I can use a byproduct. It was horrible, absolutely terrible. But the first stuff I ran through my still was just a moonshine wash with tomato. Right?
Whoa.
Wow.
Yeah. So tomato paste is actually a really good yeast nutrient. And so I ended up making just a sugar wash in a 55-gallon garbage can sitting in the kitchen that my wife was staring at. I actually had more than one. And she was certain that it was going to break the floor because it's a lot of weight.
Yeah.
Right? And so you can imagine what the spirit that comes off of that tastes like, right? But I tried everything, all the different things around, but ultimately it was going to come out to be corn because that was the connection we had. My wife grew up on a farm. We had access to all that corn. It would be foolish not to use it. So the first product that I made and where my heart really was whiskey. And funny thing is that whiskey is the thing we make the least of now. But when I started the distillery, that's what I thought I was starting. I thought I was starting a whiskey distillery. But being that we were unreasonably broke, we needed to sell something to keep the lights on. And so the natural answer there was vodka. And so I started working on a vodka, and this is true for everything that we make. So, well, we don't want to make stuff that's already on the shelf.
Right.
So we worked on this vodka, and originally the vodka was called L'Etoile DuNord. And it's a more flavorful vodka, had a little more character of the corn in it, and I like that. And so that was the first thing that we sold, although technically the first spirit we made was whiskey, but it was the last one to come out. And then because of our cuts, the way we were making the vodka, we were keeping all of that. I keep saying we. At this point, it's just me in a room, typically at night, right? Because I was working as a lawyer during the day. We wanted to have the flavorful cuts for this vodka, and then we were left with this spirit that was just neutral, and it kept stacking up. And I asked Chanel, my wife, I was like, well, what do we do with this? And we can make a liqueur or something. She was like, no, make gin. Well, I hate gin. And
many people do. Many people do. It's an ongoing argument.
It's unfair to people hate gin too.
Absolutely hated it. But your wife says make gin, so you're like, okay, we're making gin. So I went out and bought all the gins I could find and started drinking them the way that people seem to typically drink them, which was in a gin and tonic. And my observation was that I could just taste tonic. So brand after brand after brand, whether it was cheap, whether it was expensive, didn't matter. It was just tasting tonic. And maybe that's the uneducated palate at the time, but I was like, this doesn't make any sense to me. Why would anyone spend money on a good gin if they're going to drink it in a gin and tonic and they're only going to taste the tonic? You should just spend money on a really good tonic and buy the cheapest gin you could possibly get. And so if we're going to do this, then we have to flip that. We need to make a gin that is badass enough that you can taste it and you will know that it's our gin. Otherwise it's fungible, right? Yeah. And so that was the basis of our gin, which was, I want to make this, we pick a flavor and we drive with it. I was like, it's going to be juniper. And we spent a long time, a lot of R&D. I made a ton of gins. I've distilled every botanical you can probably think of, trying to figure it out. And one of the things we learned is that there were actually two versions of our gin. One of them was more island spicy. And then there's the one that is out today. And people either, if you loved one, you hated the other one, right? Which was an original lesson for me in gin. which is that,
Mm-hmm.
a good gin to one could be awful to somebody else. So I never take it personally if someone doesn't like our stuff. But yeah, the gin was, it's still my baby today because it took so long to figure that one out. And there's a lot of love has gone into squeezing that flavor out of all them juniper berries. But there's probably more juniper in that gin than any other gin that I've ever come across. But that doesn't mean that it has to taste like a pine tree. Right? Because our process is different too. And that's where the science side of it, that's what made it fun, is that we did this slow process and we did this maceration. And so we were able to get more sweetness and earthiness out of the juniper than just the vapor infusion otherwise would have given us. So a lot of work, but a lot of fun.
And can I ask?
Go ahead.
Okay. Just quick question. This could be a quick answer. When you were testing everything and making everything, the stuff you thought was okay but wasn't it, what'd you do with it? Did you give it to neighbors? Do you still have some? What'd you do with all that, leftovers, if you will?
So I kept most things and I just stored them in the back of the distillery. And eventually Maria, who now is the one who makes everything and basically runs DuNord, she just went on a purge of all of my old stuff and was like, you need to get rid of this stuff because it's clogging up my distillery. It's her distillery now. And yeah, so now most of that stuff is gone. But yeah, there were 27 full gins that we made and well over 100 distillations of individual botanicals. And I just brought it to my law office downtown Minneapolis, and lawyers like to drink, and so people knew if they come to our office, if they came up to my office, that I'd have booze, and all they had to do was I needed them to fill out notes. And so I just kept the good lawyers at Frederickson and Byron a little tipsy during the day.
Just keep them happy.
That was my R&D.
So your gin, if I can ask, you said, obviously juniper must be present in every gin, but you made sure it was present and accounted for in this gin and the tasting. What about what else goes in your gin? Is that like a secret blend, or is it, do you have other notes you can call out?
No secrets at all. The two biggest drivers of that gin are the juniper, and then behind the juniper. And we found an Italian juniper that we just really liked, and we've been running with that ever since. We've again, we just get a different depth of flavor from it. And Angelica. So Angelica is the next big note, and we use a lot of Angelica. And the roots in gin are kind of the teeth of the comb. They're usually, it's almost like a background if you think of outside of licorice. That's a little different because it's got sweetness to it. But usually you use those roots just to allow your palate to pick out the other flavors. And if it's not there, then it's kind of eating all of the pieces of a sandwich at once, right? But in our case, we wanted the root to do more than that. And so instead of using like an orris, which is a little more tame and shows up an awful lot, we used Angelica, and probably about 5 times the amount of it that typically would show up. And so it's, in a way, as I'm describing this, I'm describing what might seem like an unbalanced gin, but when you put these pieces together, they really do work. There's also some citrus peel in there, but most of our citrus flavor actually comes from coriander. The citrus peel just rounds it out. But yeah, the juniper and the Angelica, they're the ones really driving the bus.
And so this is all for, your classic go-to gin, but you also have a special edition gin that's out right now, correct?
We do. We have our barrel-aged gin.
And tell me more about that. What brought you there, and how does it differ from the traditional?
So what got us there was Maria saying, "Hey, we've got all these barrels. You mind if I throw some gin in there?" It's like, "Yeah, rock on. Like, go for it." Right. We've got there's a lot of cool stuff around the shop that just came from someone being like, let's just try this out. And barrel aged gins are not a new thing. People have been doing it for a while. Our barrel aged gin, whenever we do tasting, they're like, try Prominence, because that's what it came from. And then try the barrel aged version of it. And you will learn more about whiskey drinking that gin than I could ever possibly talk you through in making whiskey, because what that barrel does to that gin is completely flips it around.
Mm-hmm.
And it is a completely different gin. And I make that gin. But if I were to have been given the two, I don't know that I would necessarily be able to pull it out. The Angelica is strong between both, but the juniper completely changes.
Oh, wow.
And there's a completely different character to it. And that will teach you more about how powerful a barrel is and the effect that a barrel can have on a spirit.
And are you using the barrels from the whiskey that you're distilling, and then once you've got that, you're taking those barrels and reusing them? Is that how you're doing that?
Yeah, so the whiskeys, after we dump whiskey and we
Yep.
just have these barrels laying around, and then we just say, yeah, fine, we'll just throw some gin in there because why not?
Nice. Sustainable, you know?
So I'm salivating now. I haven't tried the barrel aged gin. So would you say, is that close to like a Genever type of a gin, or is it like that traditional Dutch? Because weren't those kind of barrel aged?
Well, I don't know that they I think they could be, but they wouldn't have been barrel aged in the same way that we're using these barrels. So like charred, you have a better chance of them of anything being barrel aged in more of either a wine barrel or just an untoasted, unfinished barrel, which for spirit purposes doesn't always give you the greatest flavors, right? It's kind of a tannin extraction machine. But what it does start to parallel with a Genever is that there is a sweetness to it. And the sweetness of our gin really comes raging forward in the barrel aged version. And Genevers were typically a little sweeter. Genevers, I would be looking for more of a grain character in a Dutch gin. And Dutch gins are distilled until there's nothing left, basically. So they get they're just a little heavier. But our botanical bill, it lines up with the Dutch gin. So it's more of a 10-to-1 juniper to coriander ratio, whereas a London Dry is more of a 1-to-1 ratio.
Wow. All right. And so now if I can backtrack to Maria. So Maria is your master distiller now?
Yeah, she's more than that, right? We don't use master distiller because of my own personal hang up, right? I don't think we're ever going to master this. I think we're always learning, right? But yeah, she runs production. I think we call it operations, but it's a small business, right? Everyone wears multiple hats. You do whatever needs doing. And so she's done damn near everything in the business at one point or another. And as I said before, she runs it more than I do. And I love talking about her because she hates talking about herself. And so if this can be actually a podcast episode that's about Maria Kustritz, I would love that.
Well, actually, so we didn't talk about this beforehand, but now I'm super interested in Maria because I'm, having dreamt of opening a distillery one day, things like this came to mind. Like, okay, I'm only as good as the stuff that I made in my garage. And legally,
allegedly,
of course, in a state where it was totally legal to do that. But like how do you even find the masters? Like, did you find her at a different distillery? Like, how did you come to meet Maria to help you guys out with your operations?
She came to us.
Really?
That's so she has had no experience in distilling at all before coming to us.
Wow.
And that's everyone at DuNord came from somewhere else. No one at DuNord came from the spirits industry. And that's somewhat by design. Part of the mission of the company is to diversify the industry, but the only way to do that is to reach outside of the industry. And so we don't hire people because of the skills they have. We hire them because they're good people. And so if we get to know you and we come to learn, she came to some bottling parties and we just got to know her and she was around and you could just tell she was a good person. And that's, personally, I think if you get the opportunity to work with good people, it's like the company will take care of itself, but just find good people and then be good to those people and things will typically work out for you. So yeah, she had no experience. And so the first time she ever distilled anything, it was me walking her through how to make our products and how to do all of these things. And that's the investment, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is that if you want to have that kind of a hiring policy, then you have to commit to training people. And the hope is that eventually they will become better than you. And that's true. So she is better than I am now. And I just slow things up when I'm in the shop and when I'm around. But she also has been with us for 5 years now.
Wow.
And has, I think, changed some of our processes for the better, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're better at I think our gin is better today than it was when I was making it.
Wow. All right. So this is interesting to me on a couple of levels, because my day job, I live in the world of talent and talent management. And, we've been talking about now for a while about, opening the aperture of what qualified talent could look like, and not looking at people for what they've done, but look at them for what they can do. Right. Otherwise,
Mm-hmm.
these companies that all, profess like, hey, we really, we need to really embrace diversity. We want more minority representation in leadership. We want more, women in traditionally male dominated roles. It's like, okay, well, if you're going to do that, you know, they all haven't had the experiences that, say, someone who might traditionally hold that role has had.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So you've got to
Mm-hmm.
like look beyond the scope of what have you done, which is a pretty bold move for a small business that maybe doesn't have a really programmatic training or learning and development department, right? So now I've got to ask you, well, then, besides the fact that she was a good person, because we all like to work with good people, like, what did you see that you said, you know what? Yeah, I'm going to take a chunk of my livelihood and invest it in Maria, and run the risk of this not working out, which sets you back as a business, right? Like, you
Mm-hmm.
guys are small. What was it? Like, what did you see there besides a good person?
Well, I don't want to shortchange value of good person. That's kind of
Of course.
it's
Yeah, no,
two
nobody likes to work with
words that
jerks.
encompass an awful lot. I mean,
Yeah.
it is a small business, and so we're always looking for people who can understand that scope, right, and
Mm-hmm.
understand what that means. And so versatility, if you're the person who's like, well, that's not my job, and so I'm not going to do that, it's like that doesn't really work, right?
Yeah.
My cards used to say owner, CEO, janitor, and bookkeeper, because
Yeah.
it's your job is whatever needs to get done that day. Like, we're
Yeah.
not big enough and fancy enough to have job descriptions that matter. It's why our job descriptions, why I to this day have a hard time telling you what people's jobs are, because we don't use a lot of good job descriptions, because what's the point?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
2 weeks from now it'll probably change. So having some versatility and kind of being a go with the flow type person, because it's, as I say, that we used to call it the shifting sands of DuNord, right? That we were never the
Mm-hmm.
same company for any 6-month period. And for some people, that would be extremely stressful and would make them want to tear their hair out. And then for some people, that's an adventure. And they're like, yeah, dope. I would rather do that. And
Mm-hmm.
so I do look for people that have that versatility. And other than that, they need to be a good person. They need to be able, and how do I figure that out? I mean, you need contact time, right? And
Yeah.
so if you go to our website, you can find out what every single person who works at DuNord, you'll find out their favorite pie, because it's listed after every single person. Because one of the things we talk about, and this goes back to when we were hiring for the cocktail room and everything, I was like, you got to be able to have a conversation with me about pie, right? And
Wow.
I like pie.
All
But I
right.
have
Now it looks
opinions
like we're
about
talking
pie,
about pie in a second, but
right?
all right, keep going.
Right. But the real point was, like, I need you to be able to just bullshit with me, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
if you just can't talk, right? If you just can't, hold a regular conversation. I don't have interview questions, right? Like,
Yeah.
don't tell me about your greatest challenge or something like that.
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah.
just tell me about you as a person. So tell me what your favorite pie is. And I've found out about chocolate mayonnaise cake, because I had a person who didn't eat
Oh
pie
my
at all. So I
God.
said, fine, give me a cake. I said, chocolate mayonnaise. I was like, we need to talk about chocolate mayonnaise. And then sometimes people throw out pies that I don't even think are pies. And then I argue with them about the legitimacy of their pie. And the whole point of it is, can you just shoot the shit with somebody, like like if you want to find out if someone's a good person, they can talk to you. And I'm a more introverted person. So I don't expect them to fill the room with their personality. But if you can just chat with me and it can just be real and easy, it's like, we're probably going to be able to work together.
That's awesome. That's awesome. God, that's cool. Yeah, I've got in my career, which is 20 plus, because I learned that after you start adding numbers after the 2, you don't have to say the actual number. You just say 20 plus now. So I have probably 15 years ago, I developed this just no, pardon my language, assholes policy in my life. And when I led parts of an organization, I had that policy when we would hire. And when I have interviewed with parts, other organizations, I've had that policy when I either interviewed with that person or got on board and it was like, whoa, I was recruited. This is not real. Like I can't work, with assholes basically, which I think in general, like if you avoid people like that, it's just, you're a better company for it, because people can tear an organization apart, right? Like you could be a great performer, but if you're a jerk and other people don't like being around you or don't want to hear what you have to say, or you're just bringing people down, that's ultimately going to cost the organization. So kudos to you guys for
culture is supreme.
Culture is supreme.
It starts at the top. You have to. That's a big part of my job now as DuNord continues to grow and change, is that I need DuNord to stay DuNord. And as it changes or grows and gets bigger and we go to new places, it still has to be DuNord. There's a bar in Minneapolis called Palmer's, and the guy who owns it now has a saying that we have now adopted within, because it fits us perfectly and it goes right to what you said. So feel free to steal it. It's everyone's welcome until you're an asshole. Right. And that's our standard, right? Because we're about people, we're about bringing people together, and everyone's welcome.
Yeah.
Until you're an asshole.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like it is kind of one big happy family with what you guys are doing, which we love. I mean, Brad and I, we're family, so we get it. And that leads me to the question of the foundation. Did you guys as a team, as a family, come together and you decided you wanted to do this? Talk me through and share with, our listeners kind of, so you have DuNord and now you have this foundation. How did it start? Why did it start? What is it for those who don't know?
Foundation.
Yeah.
So the foundation, we didn't have a grand plan to start a foundation.
Okay.
The foundation was, as is often the case with us, we kind of moved to, well, what's the next thing that we need to be doing? And it just so happened at that time that was the foundation. So we started it in 2020, and you have to know a little bit of, and I will try to be brief with this, but you have to know a little bit of what was going on with us in 2020. Obviously, the pandemic had changed some things for any distillery, but we also had George Floyd murdered about a mile and a half away from our distillery. But the officers where they worked was on the same block as our distillery. And so we were in ground zero for what would turn into a somewhat hellish about week or 10 days in Minneapolis. And we watched everything. Our distillery was set on fire. There was a lot of destruction, and it was a sad time for a number of reasons. But as the dust was beginning to settle on that, it became clear that what the community didn't need necessarily was a new whiskey or a coffee liqueur. What the community needed, because we had no grocery stores left, right? And for people who had a little means, car, they could drive out to the suburbs, but for other people, they couldn't. And so where were they going to get diapers, hygiene products, etc.? And so we started a food and supply distribution operation out of this part of our distillery that was set on fire. The community showed up, helped us clean it out, and it was set on fire Thursday night into Friday. So we put it out Friday. And Saturday we started the operation. Sunday we had our first volunteers out there, and by Monday we had hundreds of volunteers, and we were feeding 300 families. We had 300 volunteers, and we were feeding 400 families a day. And we, as we also got some press around the fact that, we had some fires set and things like that. And so we were getting all of this attention, and the industry stepped up for us. I mean, other distillers raised over $100,000 just to support us. Wow. But all these GoFundMes kept popping up, and we had insurance. We would later find out that we were underinsured, but we had insurance, and we knew a lot of people didn't. And so we wanted to deflect some of this attention. And so we started our own GoFundMe. And this was in a hotel room in Bloomington, Minnesota, because the day after the distillery was set on fire, my apartment was set on fire. And so it was great way to wake up at 2 a.m. in the morning. And so my wife and I, so she was in California at the time. She flew back. She was freaked out. And she flew back, and we're in a hotel room in Bloomington, Minnesota. We're getting up. We're going to go to the food and supply operation that we're running. It's an all-day thing. And just sitting on the bed before we left, we started this GoFundMe. And we put $30,000. And I think by the time we got from Bloomington, which is not that far away from Minneapolis, by the time we got to the distillery, we'd already raised the $30,000. And so we were trying to figure out who had the password to go in there and change it. And it was kind of a pain in the ass. We're like, well, someone's got to take care of this. So let's just bump it up to 50K, right? Yeah. We'll never make that. Well, we made that. And then it was put it at $100,000. And then we made that. And it was like, all right, put it at $1 million, right? And we just about raised $1 million.
Wow.
And because we had raised so much money, the way GoFundMe works is that when you take that money out, it would come directly to me, the person. And a third of that would then go away in taxes, right? Because it looks like income, regardless of what I would do with it. And so we started the foundation to solve that problem.
Sure.
Which was, we don't want to have to take this as income to us. We want to be able to use it for what people gave it for, which is to support this community and to help some of these businesses get back on their feet. And so we started the DuNord Foundation out of necessity, and within a couple of months, and submitted all the letters in the world and to try to get things fast tracked. And we were able to get it fast tracked so we could become a 501c3 and get up and operating.
Wow.
So you guys today are still, it's the same mission that it was before. Has it changed?
We actually are working off of the same original mission. Sitting there in the hotel room, we said there's three things that we want to work on, right? One is that we have this immediate need, that we have people, there's kids waiting in these lines to get food, right? I mean, something has to be done there. And so we needed to do that because that's what the community needed. The second piece was that there were other businesses that didn't get the notoriety that we got, but were more important to the community. I mean, the one Somali pharmacy was trashed, right? But no one knew about it because they didn't have CNN at their facility. But they were at least as important as we were, and so we wanted to raise some money so we could turn around and give it to them. And so we did that. We did, I think, 73 businesses at $15,000 a pop. Which was there for some tax reason. I think over $15,000, they have to pay some other tax on it or something.
Okay.
And that was supposed to be that was the second, kind of the intermediate goal. And the third leg of the stool was, we don't want to do this again. And part of the reason, at least I believe, part of the reason why, some of that anger got turned around and visited on the business community is because in communities of color, you just don't see yourself in the business community. The businesses and business owners are these others. And as long as they're others, they can be your whipping boy. They can be the source of, or not, well, I suppose the source of and the recipient of your anger. And so long term, if you want to change that, then you got to change the business community. It's got to look like the community in which it sits. And so we wanted to work on making it easier for other entrepreneurs to walk the same road that I got to walk. But again, hopefully to do it better capitalized with a little less stress and all of that. And so that's the third leg of the stool. And so we've accomplished goals 1 and 2. And so what's left is, how can we support and elevate these entrepreneurs and give them a roadmap to resources that already exist, and where those resources don't exist, figure out how we can get it to them. So that way they can eventually be here sitting on your show talking about their business that outcompeted me.
So one of the things that I want to actually ask now, you've got a lot of minority owned distilleries starting to pop up. How was that? Like, you didn't go into this because you're like, I'm going to be the first Black Minnesotan to open up a distillery. You said, I want to open a distillery. And it happened to be that you were the first Black distillery to be opened. But now that you got into the distilling business, like, tell me about that experience. Was it, did you feel it was a steeper climb? Like, what was that like?
Well, I think that starting an undercapitalized business in a capital intensive industry is always going to be a steep climb. And I, my friends who have distilleries across the country, I know that they were scrapping just as hard as we were. I think when I started, and part of it, sorry, as always, longer answer than you're probably asking for, but growing up in Minnesota because I've been black all my life. Growing
Works
up in
out
Minnesota,
that way.
it does. And it stood out, right? And I always stood out. And I was always aware of that. And it's even friends would talk about me with the racial tag first, right? And so when I became an attorney, I was like, oh, well, you're a black lawyer. Right? Well, I just kind of wanted to just be a lawyer, right?
Yeah.
Or if even, in high school, right, doing high school theater, right? It's like, oh, well, you're a black actor. It's like, what about just being an actor? Like I couldn't just be Chris. And that frustrated me, continues to frustrate me. So when I started the distillery, nobody knew it was black owned. And I was really cool with that, right? Because what I wanted people to support our brand because it was good. My whole thesis for the business was, if we create the best version of these spirits in this category, it'll work out. Apparently, you also need marketing and sales and all that kind of stuff, which we didn't have. And so we paid the iron price to figure that out. But that was the original thesis, is like, we're just going to be the best. We're going to be the best in the bottle. And that's it. So nobody knew that it was a black owned brand really until the Super Bowl came to Minneapolis. And then we had all this press that ended up at our place. And they were like, why aren't you telling this story? And it's because of my own uncomfortability with it. Right. We now tell that story, and we tell it now because I had to have the come to Jesus moment of all of our work to diversify the industry. Well, part of what was missing is that there weren't people to look at, so people can say, all right, well, if that guy can do it, then I can too. Yeah. And if we were going to continue to hide because I get skittish when, and I want people to support us because they like what we make, not because of the color of my skin, then I wasn't really putting myself where my mouth was. And so, we need to tell that story, and we do now, but it took an evolution to get us there. I'll tell you, I didn't really know how not diverse the industry was until 2015, but I walked into an ACSA convention in Chicago and looked around, and I'm like, I'm it. There's 1,000 people in this room, and it's me. And again, for a Minnesotan, that felt odd, right? Like, I mean, growing up in Minnesota, I'm used to being one of very few, but it was out of proportion. And I asked, so Paul Hletko, of Fuse Spirits, a friend of mine, he was the president of ACSA at the time. And I asked him, I was like, have you ever noticed the lack of diversity here? And if you know Paul, you'll understand where this comment comes from. He was like, no, I haven't. Because he's a direct, honest guy, right? I love Paul. But why would he have, right? It's a tough industry. We're all probably going to fail. Everyone is behind the 8 ball right away. It's extra time to think about diversity in the industry. People are just dealing with what's right in front of their face. But for me, it was impossible for that to not be right in front of my face. Yeah. So, from the beginning, I think we stuck out a little bit. It was a little harder raising money. I don't think I fit the bill of what people were expecting, which is why we couldn't get any bank to touch us. We couldn't find any. It was a community development organization that finally came through and gave us $60,000, and that's all the money we could get. And so to put that in context, the next cheapest distillery that opened around that same time, I think had $500,000, but they had to go out and raise a little bit more. And the next one after that had 1.2, and we had $60,000.
Damn.
But again, like, it's not the Chris Montana pity party. I mean, I also love the fact that we didn't have the money to pay for consultants or anything like that, because we had to be our own consultants. We had to learn all of the science. We had to understand the process inside and out, backwards and forwards. And we had to be innovative in our process, so that way we could make a product that would be good on the shelf. And a lot of that comes from the necessity of just being dead ass broke for most of the time that DuNord has existed. But, it was its own challenge. Now I just get people expecting that they're like, oh, you've got a brand. It probably is some sort of sweet fruit flavored liqueur. And we do have a couple of liqueurs, but I make other things that aren't just, sugar bombs. Yeah. The last thing I'll say on it in the as long as I'm giving long-winded answers, is that It is so much better today than it was. It is night and day. And I mean this. I didn't expect it to be like this in my lifetime. But
Wow.
2020 came around, and I think it just kicked a lot of people in the ass. And there are now organizations out there that are actively looking to fund and support persons of color within this industry. The Nearest and Jack Advancement Initiative is a great one. Pronghorn's out there putting money into these businesses and supercharging them, and and there are others, but I didn't expect that we would be there. So now there are dozens of these brands and distilleries out there, and that's a great thing.
Yeah. I think you give a lot of people inspiration that, well, if he can do it, I can do it. And it's inspiring for even someone like me, who's a woman who's trying to get in the alcohol industry. And that's tough in and of itself as well. So to see people who act like you, look like you, or doing things like you that they can look up to is huge. And the fact that you're breaking barriers in that is huge. So kudos to you, your team. I love everything that you guys are doing. And it feels genuine. It feels like a family. It feels like, yeah, we may screw up, but we're trying to do the best that we can, and it shows. So it's really inspiring what you're doing. And it makes me want to come out and visit. Geez, Brad, you got all the good spots out there in Minnesota.
I know. I'm telling you, get out here.
We're doing a Minnesota tour for sure. God, no,
come out.
this
we'll keep you in good spirits.
If you answered it at the beginning, DuNord. Where did that name come from?
So again, no money, right? Mm-hmm. And we thought that the only way that we were going to survive is if people knew that we were local. And so when we first were putting together the company, and the bottles and everything, and even the original product names, was all based off of beating people over the head with the fact that this was a company from Minnesota. Mm-hmm. The Minnesota state motto is L'Étoile du Nord. And so our first product was L'Étoile du Nord vodka, and the company was originally DuNord Craft Spirits. We would later change it to DuNord Social Spirits. And apparently, just in case anyone is wondering, nobody knows the Minnesota state motto, right? And nobody knows any state mottos. And so our whole idea of this is what's going to make people know that we're local completely backfired. People thought that we were like either a French company, or we were trying to be French, or they didn't really understand it. And so, yeah, again, our marketing, we spent $600 on marketing. That was the entire budget for designing all of the bottles, every image that we had from 2013 all the way up until 2020. So we did what we could with what we had.
Now we know. I don't even know my state motto, if it makes you feel any better. So
it's all right.
I don't know.
You're in good company.
Yeah.
Well, all right. So we're kind of rounding the corner here on time, but I want to one, get a couple things out on the table, and to ask you if there's anything else you want to make sure people know. But the first and foremost obvious thing is, okay, so good spirits made by good people. Tell us, what do you guys make? Where can people find it? I know that if you haven't had it, but you've flown Delta and you enjoy your vodka drinks, you can have it on Delta, right? But how do people find where you guys are selling, and what are they looking for?
Well, the easiest way is to go to our website, DuNord Social Spirits. The Google will take you there, and you can order in most states. You'll be able to order online. If you're in Minnesota or Georgia or Florida, you may be able to find us at a local liquor store. And if it's not there, then you should get in their face and ask them why not. Yeah. And so the products that we have out, we have our original, right, which is our vodka. The name on that has changed from those origins, though. It's Foundation Vodka now. And as we talked about the foundation earlier, it's a call out to that. Also to vodka's role in most cocktails. We have Prominence Gin, which was originally Fitzgerald Gin, which was a call out to F. Scott, but it's the same gin, but prominent in your glass, prominent juniper. We also have our apple liqueur,
which is delicious.
Which again is will taste like an apple pie in your glass, and it is
coming back to pie.
The best time to be in the distillery is when we're making the apple liqueur, because it's just hundreds of gallons of cider that's being boiled down.
Okay, that's what
it's
I'm
amazing,
coming.
right? But our fastest growing spirit is our Cafe Frida coffee liqueur, which is named after a high school teacher of mine who was like another mother to me. And it's when we had the cocktail room, and as we reopen and we open up our restaurant, it's the only discount that we give is to teachers, because they deserve it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And, to round things out, we have the barrel aged gin. So it's that same gin, but barrel aged, completely changes it. It's really fun. It's very much a little like a nerd project. We don't expect that we're going to hit it big by selling barrel aged gin, but it's really fun. And so if you are a gin fan, I highly recommend it. And also our mixed blood whiskey, which we call it mixed blood because transparency matters to us. Everything in that bottle didn't come from us. And so there's some stuff that we made, and then there's source whiskey in there too. That's why it's called mixed blood. But a good, it's kind of it's been described as an entry level whiskey, which I don't know how I feel about that, but it kind of was designed to be that in a way. We wanted to take our super spicy, high rye, small barrel whiskey and cut it with some other bourbons, to make something that would be both approachable, but also have the character of a well-aged whiskey. And so it's, a little bit lower proof, but you're still going to get some of the character of a 4-year plus old whiskey.
And then can people come and visit you? Do you guys have a tasting room? What does that look like? If we wanted to come see you,
we used to have a tasting room, but as I mentioned before, part of our distillery was set on fire, and we had to shift some things around, and we never were able. So that what used to be our cocktail room is now part of production, and Maria's got all kinds of stuff stacked up in there. But this summer we are opening the DuNord restaurant and DuNord cocktail room, which is just about 2 blocks away from the original distillery. In a building. It's a 100-plus-year-old building. It's a historic building that was also set on fire at Lake and 27th. So it's called the Coliseum. So we're really excited about that because people haven't been able to come and see us, and we haven't been able to interact with people for so long. So it's a really exciting milestone for us to get back to that.
Awesome.
That's awesome. All right. Last question. Pie. What's your favorite pie?
If it's made right, sweet potato.
Sweet potato pie.
Way.
I eat mostly. So I just made 2 pies yesterday, actually, and I ate about 3/4 of one watching football, and that was pumpkin, because pumpkin is it's just too easy, right? Like I can make a pumpkin pie in my sleep.
Yeah.
Sweet potato takes a little bit more work, but if I'm really going after it, sweet potato pie.
Wow.
Nice.
I was not going to I was going to guess like a apple crumble maybe. I was not going to guess sweet potato.
Yeah. I'm a fruit pie guy. I love raspberry pie. That's like
raspberry pie? Cherry pie. I go for cherry.
Yeah.
And also apple, but the goo ratio really matters. So like a proper apple pie that is just apple without a bunch of just random snot that they put into the can.
Yeah.
Totally.
Then I'm here for it, because I like sweets. I have a crazy sweet tooth, but I don't like candy sweet.
Yeah.
So like fruit sweet, all day.
See, banana cream pie all the way.
Oh yeah,
all the way. Yeah, love it.
But it can't be that like chemical, plasticky banana flavor, because that's terrible.
Yeah. We've had arguments in the shop as to whether or not banana cream pie and French silk qualify as proper pies. Like to me,
well, why wouldn't they qualify as a pie? It comes in a crust.
Because to me, like to be a pie, it's not just about being in the tin, right? Like it's also
like a martini, I guess.
To me, there should be some substance to it, and those seem like just goo delivery devices.
Oh no!
Like what makes that?
Okay, so you're anti-goo.
I'm just not pro goo. I think a pie to me is, and again, like it says a guy who likes sweet potato, but it's like a firm custard pie. Like I'm here for that, right?
Yeah.
Cheesecake, I can do that all day long, right? If you want to call it a pie or a cake, whatever, I'm here for both arguments. But yeah, the goo ones, where it's just, if you were to tip it upside down, you just feel like it would all run out. Like to me,
right?
That's
sure,
not a proper pie.
Okay. All right. I see the argument there. All right.
Well,
I mean, I'm not coming at you, right? Like you do you. Like if that's what we say.
No.
Like, hey,
if we're having a pie party and that means more banana cream pie for me, I'm happy. We're good.
That's exactly what it means.
So I feel you on the delivery system. Just because it's in the crust or the tin, maybe it's not.
I make the argument. If it's in a martini glass, it's a martini. If it's in a pie tin, it's pie. I stand firm on that.
Okay.
I mean, I'd be all for it if you were eating the pie tin or chewing up the glass, but I think it's about, what's actually going to make it in your body. But this, by the way, this is exactly how we would know, right? So Jules, we would hire you, right? Because you can take a swipe at your pie, right? And still engage and still have a smile on your face, right? You could definitely work at DuNord.
Wow.
Awesome.
That would be so fun. Got to get to Minnesota.
You do.
Well, yeah, that's step one, right? But
well, you know what,
Jules,
you're in the market for a house. Cost of living out here is a lot cheaper. Well, Chris,
you know what?
Thank you.
You're gonna, Brad. Before I just want to add, Chris, I am so excited to have some cocktails with your spirits. They're sitting in my bar. They're just staring back at me. I have 3 more days to go. It's the first thing I'm going to grab. I cannot wait. And knowing you, meeting you, learning your story is making me that much more excited to try your product. So thank you for coming on and talking with us a little bit.
Yeah. Thank you for having me. This has been fun.
Cool.